Dr. Anthony Harper, you're blessed to be with Congressman Russ Fulcher from Idaho. And thank you, Congressman Fulcher, for joining me on this very important topic of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So what does the International Holocaust Remembrance Day mean to you?
Well, Dr. Harper, first of all, thanks for speaking with me. And I believe that's on the 27th coming up here, and it's a very important day.
Yes.
The Holocaust was one of the extremely difficult black marks in our history, in our world history. And the importance of remembering that is paramount, because if we somehow disregard that memory, if we somehow let that slip away into history and not get proper attention, you can always risk that tragic possibility that it could happen again. And this is something that is unacceptable for a whole host of reasons, for personal reasons, for humanitarian reasons, for political reasons, for religious reasons. And so what took place during the Holocaust has got to be documented. It's got to be remembered. I've had the privilege of supporting the Never Again Act as a co-sponsor, and in part to just make sure that that is the case. And Dr. Harper, I've had an opportunity to personally visit 2 different Holocaust museums, and how incredibly moving that is. You know, I'm a farm kid. I was born and raised on a dairy farm, and you get to see a lot of things about life that aren't necessarily pleasant to see. But I will also tell you that going through the Holocaust Museum in Tel Aviv made me physically ill. But I had to see it. I didn't want to see it, but I had to see it. Mm-hmm. And that's, everyone needs to see that, because once that's impregnated on your mind, then that is a barrier to never allowing this to happen again.
What are your concerns about the current administration and their treatment of Israel?
Well, the current administration seems to be not nearly as supportive of American-Israeli relations as past ones have, certainly in the most previous administration prior to that. And that's troubling for a number of reasons. There appears to be empathy to, or even support in part of this administration for a dividing Palestinian state, when dividing Israel is not the answer there, when Palestine doesn't even recognize them to be legitimate. And so that is very troubling. I don't know the level of support within Congress to buck the administration on that. I know that there's very strong opposition to dividing Israel within the Republican side. I am not certain about the Democrat side, but we certainly have our hands full with the current administration on this issue.
Are you familiar with the peace plan map that President Trump and Jared Kushner had?
I don't think I am.
Okay, well, in that peace plan map, it showed Israel divided, a Palestinian state in the heartland of Israel. Probably more of an idea for Jared Kushner, but that disturbed a lot of evangelical Christians. And you were talking about scripture and against that in Joel chapter 3, verse 2, the prophet Joel. But I'm wondering what's going to be developing with that in this next election, in light of what Jared Kushner had in this peace plan, dividing up Israel.
You know, that it brings to mind an analogy that was made, and this is going to possibly surprise you, and maybe it's an off-the-wall analogy, but of all people, there was a comedian and broadcaster by the name of Dennis Miller who made a statement on this topic. And he used the analogy of a football field. And he said, okay, here is the Middle East and the Israeli Arab world. And then you put a postage stamp in the middle of that football field, and that's the Israeli portion. And he said, now, if we just divide that postage stamp, everything is going to be fine and everybody's going to be happy, which just, of course, points out the absurdity of this. And ultimately, it's the discrimination against Israel. And we all know that the so-called Palestinian state will not be satisfied because they simply don't recognize Israel to be legitimate in the first place. And so we need to stand with our allies in Israel. Dr. Harper, I might just mention one other thing, because I do get exposed to some things in Congress that not everyone gets exposed to. And I can tell you that the value that Israel brings to the United States in terms of intelligence gathering is tremendous. We get intelligence from our friends in Israel around for the entire region that we could obtain no other way. That's very beneficial to the West. It's very, very beneficial to America. And those are things that many people don't really understand. This is not just a one-way street. When we support Israel and American-Israeli relations, this is a two-way street.
Okay, if this map comes up again, though, if this peace plan map that President Trump and Kushner had, if that appears again in this election, what do you would happen?
Well, it doesn't. Haven't seen it, but it doesn't sound like I could support it, and I'm sure that a lot of my colleagues will be the same way. I think, Dr. Harper, we're going to see a significant change in the makeup of Congress by the end of this year. I believe that politically is going to transpire, but what we would need to be very cautious of anything that happens between now and November of 22.
Okay, well, we know other issues that are related to anti-Semitism. Iran, this administration, the Biden administration, conversations with Iran, and the BDS with the well-known controversial, the Ben and Jerry ice cream issue, and so much more. But the Jewish cemetery desecration that I had brought up with you, in Vilnius, Lithuania, very troubling that this is a very prominent Jewish cemetery that leaders in Vilnius, Lithuania, and elsewhere are considering building a sports pavilion over the graves of the Jewish people. And I think it's for a lot of the Jewish people, they're concerned about this ongoing, the lack of restoring the Jewish cemeteries, an ongoing act of desecration.
We had, I agree with that. And we had legislation last year, I believe it was House Resolution 246, on opposing any effort to delegitimize the state of Israel. And this was one of the examples about that. And also Resolution 183 condemning anti-Semitism or hateful expressions of intolerance, which certainly, if you build over the top of a Jewish cemetery, remember, these are people that were wiped out without regard, without any kind of humanitarian consideration. And then to further desecrate by in arrogant fashion by building over the top of that, that's just something that should not be tolerated, and certainly oppose that.
Well, I'm thinking about how it would go over here in the United States if someone wanted to build a sports pavilion over the graves of our soldiers in Arlington Cemetery. There would be an outrage about that, and
there should be. That's right.
Yes, and hopefully more Congress people will be addressing the issue of restoring the cemetery to its former glory, is what their desire, the Jewish people. And I just wanted to remind you about that website. You can learn more, of course, is savevilna.org, and hope a lot of Congress people will be aware of that. But other concerns that you might have about where our country is headed in a direction regarding Israel, or just in general, we've had a lot of problems here lately with this administration.
Dr. Harper, it's what a difference a year makes. And America has departed from one of strong economic strength, of strong foreign influence, with a quasi-secure border system, to one that is truly being, I believe, overrun in terms of influence by our foreign neighbors. And America is unique, and it is special. And America is a peacekeeper throughout the world. We are a non-expansionist country that has provided stabilization throughout the world. And so what you see happening now with the weakening of our economy, with the socialization policy that this administration and the current majority are trying to push, the socialization, the weakness that brings, the lack of influence that brings with it, those are all things that have not just an impact in American life and on our liberties, but it has an impact on the world stage. And I think we're starting to see some of the ramifications of that now with the aggression that China is seeing on Taiwan. They wouldn't have done that if they perceived America as strong, and Russia being aggressive with Ukraine. We didn't see that at the previous administration. And I'm not saying the previous administration was perfect, but I'm saying that the foreign policy, the economic policy, the viewpoint towards liberty was substantially different than it is today. And that's alarming to me. I mean, this thing called politics ebbs and flows. We all know that. It always has. But right now, those of us who are conservative in nature, those of us who believe in independence and personal liberty and the power of the family and the individual and the priority of the family and the individual need to really stand and be heard here and try to do all that we can to change the course back to the course that our original founders put us on here.
I sure appreciate you sharing your concerns about this. I know America is in trouble on several fronts, and our Jewish audience sure appreciate your addressing this issue. And for them, finally, you'd mentioned about the restoration, talked about the restoration of the Jewish cemetery to their former glory. Besides yourself promoting that restoration, how many other Congress people do you think would support that as well?
Well, I think that would. I think you would see the traditional lines there. There's a very strong base that is in support of American-Israeli relations, and this would fall in that category. And so, I appreciate you raising the awareness of this. I'm happy to further raise awareness on this as well, and perhaps that's something we can take some further steps to support. Even some of our friends on the other side of the aisle. And they all should, frankly. They won't, but I do believe that we have enough bipartisan support to where they would get the majority of Congress on something like that. And I would be happy to help promote it.
You know, I was just thinking once again about that analogy of the Arlington Cemetery. Those in the other party across the aisle that might have a problem with this, if we brought up that issue about how they would feel if there was an entertainment center built over the graves of our soldiers in Arlington Cemetery, that might help them understand, put it in perspective. But I appreciate you sharing with our viewers on these very crucial issues. I've heard the phrase "never again" regarding the Holocaust. We can't let that happen again.
There was, as I mentioned earlier, there was a piece of legislation, I believe it was House Resolution 943, called the Never Again Education Act. And that was last year. And the purpose for that was to expand education programs by the U.S. Holocaust Museum and to combat anti-Semitism. And of course, we only have direct legal impact on America. However, America is in a leadership role, and when we take that stand, and we are the beacon for the world on this issue, and when we say this is simply something that it cannot be tolerated. I mean, and there's so many reasons why, but everyone should oppose this. I mean, if a certain segment of our society can be discriminated against to the extent that our Jewish friends have, then what's to stop it from going beyond into any other group? And the answer is nothing. And so we need to lock arms and stand firm and just simply not tolerate this kind of behavior anywhere in the world.
Final comments. In Boise, being from Idaho, we've had a couple occurrences with swastikas that showed up at the Anne Frank Memorial, but elsewhere in downtown Boise, in a tunnel near Anne Frank Memorial. And this has been alarming about, the expression of anti-Semitism with these swastikas in Boise, Idaho.
This is my home, and it's been my family's home for more than 100 years, and that's not the heritage of this area. And quite frankly, when I hear things like that, I just want to find out who did this and shake them and say, knock it off. And I have to believe, I don't know this because I'm not even sure that the perpetrators have been caught, but I suspect that they have no idea what they are standing for when they draw a swastika on a wall or they desecrate the Anne Frank Memorial. I don't know that, but I would like to think that some robust education, like we're talking about with Remembrance Day of the Holocaust on the 27th, and other things of awareness, that any objective human being would realize that just this is simply not something that cannot be tolerated.
Now, I guess a final comment on the anti-Semitism issue. You've heard of UNRWA, this United Nations relief work agency that President Trump defunded. Senator Risch has been very involved with exposing that issue as well. And how many of the Congress members are you aware of that have been dealing with this UNRWA issue, that UN agency has been inciting kids to violence against the Jews?
You know, similar to the issue of American-Israeli relations, UNRWA, the BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, the Iran treaty, and so on, tends to fall on similar lines. And I think that without knowing for a fact, it's my perception that you would see almost uniform opposition to the UNRWAs of the world and funding that type of thing through at least the Republican side and some of the Democrat side. And once again, though, I think the education and the awareness is important because, you know, let's face it, United Nations Relief and Work Agency, that sounds, if you just hear those words, that sounds like a good organization. Then you start peeling the onion back on what do they really do? What do they really support? And that's where I think you come in, and just the awareness that you're helping to drive forward helps.
It is very disturbing. I would encourage people to pray for Israel. There is a special blessing. I know that you're aware of Genesis 12:3 says blessings for those that bless and curses for those that curse. And this is a covenant with Abraham and his seed, that God makes the covenant with them. And it's a very trying time for America, for this world. But I know that a lot of our viewers and listeners are really convinced that from this promise that America will be blessed if we bless Israel in every way. And thank you for blessing Israel, Congressman Fulcher. And do you have a website that people to learn more information about you and your position as Congressman from Idaho?
There's actually two of them. Of course, there's russfulcher.com, and that's a more personal side of things. But the house is fulcher.house.gov. And I certainly encourage people to follow that. Knowing that other than you, Dr. Harper, there's fewer and fewer media outlets that accurately portray what's going on. And so with fulcher.house.gov, we're trying to add more news and factual information on that, so that people have alternative places to go where they can get accurate facts. And so fulcher.house.gov, and then on the personal side, russfulcher.com.
Well, thank you, Congressman Fulcher. I was thinking just finally, in light of the whole Palestinian issue, well, just to remind people, and I know that you're aware of this, that it was the Roman Emperor Hadrian that invented the word Palestine. And this lie has stuck to today. A lot of people believe that there is a Palestinian race of people, but an invention from the Roman Emperor Hadrian has greatly impacted a lot of people. And I think I've heard several congressmen just recently talk about the myth of Palestine. Have you heard that from other congressmen?
You know, I haven't, but that's interesting information. I appreciate you sharing that. And the other point you made, I think, needs to be underscored. Those who support Israel will be blessed. Those who do not support Israel will not be blessed. And, and America generally has supported Israel, and we have been blessed. And so we need to take heed to that. And I appreciate you bringing that point up.
Thanks for sharing and commenting about all these very crucial issues regarding Israel that will be a blessing to Israel. Of course, I want to encourage people to pray for you and pray for everyone in Congress and leadership positions, because we have a lot at stake. I would hate to see America fall.
And, you know, I just want to underscore that by just letting you know that I believe in the power of prayer. And the impact, it's had an impact on me personally. It's had an impact on me professionally, politically. And I know that is a channel of strength when you seek divine guidance and wisdom and assistance. And so those prayers are incredibly important, more important than many people know. So thank you again for bringing that point up. And that's something that we can all do.
Well, I hope to meet you in person sometime in the near future. I know this COVID virus issue has impacted interaction with a lot of people, but not only would I like to meet with you, but a lot of Congress members on the issue of Israel. And once again, thanks for sharing, and may you be blessed with good health for you and your family, and encouragement, and looking forward to seeing you again, and wisdom as well in all the decisions that have to be made.
Thank you, Dr. Harper, and you as well.
We read news every day, news that's informative but rarely encouraging. The Intermountain Christian newspaper aims to change that. They present the news you need to know, from what's going on in your community to your world, with encouraging words, motivation, and the resources you need to make positive changes in your life. What is your local government doing that you need to know about? What's happening in your community you need to be a part of? Whether it's a story from your neighborhood, a national story, or an encouraging word, you'll find biblical issues of everyday life in the Intermountain Christian newspaper. Intermountain Christian News is produced and supported by the work and donations of individuals and churches. You'll find it at churches, Christian bookstores, by subscription, and online at imcnews.org. To find out more about supporting this local resource, go online at imcnews.org or call Intermountain Christian News in Boise, Idaho at 208-703-8688. The Intermountain Christian News, a voice sharing the truth on matters dear to people's hearts.